My name is Robbie Kincaid. I am faculty in the School of Health Technology and Management at Stony Brook University. I work in collaboration with Suffolk Community College to create and develop workshops and trainings for people in relation to diversity and cultural consciousness. Microaggressions, very important topic to bring up when we talk about cultural consciousness and cultural humility, especially given the climate that we're living in today. Microaggressions can be simplified to mean many insults, many devaluations. Microaggressions are something that occur daily. They manifest in ways that seem very subtle and sometimes very explicit. Microaggressions can be shared between people of different ethnicities and people of the same ethnicities. What happens mostly with microaggressions is that we have people who are in positions of power using microaggressions towards people who are not of power or disempowered or oppressed. In our culture, we have white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied, and Christian as the dominant cultures or dominant characteristics of our community. And so it's not uncommon where people will say things or do things, sometimes unintentionally, mostly unintentionally, but sometimes intentionally, that create a sensation for the person being oppressed, which would be people of color, that wear on their conscience and wear on their sense of self-worth over time. For example, as an African American woman, a microaggression towards me might represent someone saying, wow, you're very articulate. And that may be a compliment, or it may be construed as a microaggression. It's a microaggression in the context wherein a person says, you're quite intelligent, with the backdrop being there's no expectation for a person who is of color to be articulate. The problem with microaggressions is that they're so difficult to pinpoint because one is not sure, is this a compliment or is this something that the person really feels? But when it's a position of power, as I stated before, if it's a white person speaking to a person of color and they say you're articulate, that person of color will most likely perceive it to be a microaggression. And perception is often the reality. It may not necessarily be intended, but that is their reality. Microaggression occurs in my position as faculty at Stony Brook University. It is not uncommon that I am confused or mistaken for clerical staff or secretarial staff, which would not be a bad thing, except I'm not secretarial and I'm not clerk. And this assumption is made based on the color of my skin. People often look at me as if I am a surprise to be a faculty person. It's important to realize that, first and foremost, microaggressions are, people live this way every day. It's like every day, like a little drop of water dropping on your head. Every day, every day. And I didn't expect you to know that. Oh, you're so smart? Or is that your car? Or wow, you speak really well for someone from Mexico. It's continual. And what ends up happening is it eventually wears a person down. As a professor, I'm very, very conscious of my students, and I would hope that all faculty would be very conscious of their students. But I myself, like most people, have our own hidden biases. And sometimes they manifest as microaggressions in the classroom. A student might experience that microaggression considering that the instructor is in a position of power and the student is not. If you have a diverse group of students and say, for example, when you're asking for students to raise their hands to answer questions and you point to specific students and leave out other students, for example, students of color, if you leave them out, as if the black students wouldn't be able to answer the question or the Latino students wouldn't be able to answer the question, that is microaggression. And again, it might be unintentional, it might be purely subconscious, and then the reverse is true also. We find that if you're in classes that are dealing with mathematics or classes that are dealing with engineering or the hard sciences, instructors are more likely to call on white or Asian students than they are to call on black students. And those are microaggressions. And one might say to themselves, if that young student who happens to be Asian is able to answer that question, then is it perceived as a microaggression? Because it seems to be positive that a faculty member would call on a student. And then again, it depends on what the intentions are behind it. And even though the idea is subconscious that an Asian student will be able to answer these kinds of questions, even though it seems to be a positive, it may not be, because it's a stereotype that Asian students would automatically be able to answer questions that are related to math and sciences. So it's kind of like a disservice, especially if you call on an Asian student who cannot answer the question. And so I find that students might experience microaggressions in the classroom in that way. Other ways might be in the subtleties in grading homework or assignments that they're given. What I try to do for myself, because I have 70 students plus in my classrooms, is I blind myself to who wrote the assignment. So in other words, I cover the name of the person who wrote the assignment so that I'm able to read it with a clear head. Because we all have biases. I mean, there's no two ways about that. And if you read a paper that's written by a Felipe Hernandez or Yong Soo King, then you know that the ethnicity of the person, and you might be tempted to grade it a different way, even if it's subconscious. I know that it's important for me as a faculty member to not only be very sensitive to the fact that there are differences in classrooms, but also to be conscious of the difference in faculty. One of the issues that we deal with at my institution is that the faculty does not necessarily represent the demographics of the student body. And given that, we find that there are more incidences of microaggression and macroaggressions. And in the institutional level, I know that my institution is doing a lot to try to deal with the isms and the different negative oppression that happens to students of color. But at the same token, one of the institutional things that we might want to consider doing is broadening or looking deeper into the well of applicants to find people that are more, that have the same demographics of our students. That's what we can do on a macro level, institutional. There are also different regulations and rules and policies that can be implemented in schools to ensure that faculty are not acting out on microaggressions or subtle implicit biases. And one way to do that might be to make sure that faculty and staff attend some sort of anti-bias or microaggression training. I am of the opinion, quite frankly, that a lot of our behavior we're conditioned to engage in. But I also believe very strongly that when we know better, we do better. That's what Maya Angelou teaches us.